the easiest jobs in our society to replace with computers are the ones at the top. The
Plumbers are safe.
Well,
maybe, but
yeah,
it's a lot harder.
Like President of the United States, the Supreme Justice, the Justice of the Supreme Court, legislatures,
the Federal Reserve, please.
Federal Reserve. These are people that take in information, think about it, and make a decision. And what do computers do? They take in information, they make a computation, and they print out an output.
This is something that Noah and I explore, is it's going to cause, or if it's not already causing, a revolution. It's difficult to say what's on the other side of that revolution, but one thing you can say, and we can look back at the Industrial Revolution and other revolutions, is it will cause a lot of havoc.
Welcome to the Futures Edge podcast. I'm Jim Urio. As usual, brains behind the operation. Bob Iacchino in the background. Healy, our top producer. We have Marty Weiner, who was the former CEO of Reddit, founding engineer of Pinterest.
CTO.
We have CTO.
Not the big chair.
Yeah, you're right. CTO is the Chief Technical Officer, correct?
That's right.
It's even better. Because when we're talking to tech nerds, we want them to have technical in. So you just gave yourself a promotion, in my opinion.
That's right.
Yeah, we have Noah Healy, market designer, game theorist, trained in nuclear engineering, all-around tech nerd as well. And when we say that lovingly. In many ways, Bobby and I both wish we were tech nerds too, because you guys make all the money. What do you got, Bob?
I wish I looked as much like Aaron Rodgers as Marty does. Do you ever get Aaron Rodgers, Marty?
No.
Wow.
Good. He's a dick.
I love him now that he's a Jet, Jimmy. I do.
Well, why, if we were the NFL, why wouldn't they have immediately tried to schedule a game between the Bears and the Jets? That would be more compelling, I think, than the Packers and the Jets. Are you guys football guys, Marty?
No. I try to be, but I am so surrounded by stuff to do that I get stuck doing that.
He reads
what
books,
about you?
Jim.
No. Noah reads books.
Noah reads. Yeah, he's got books on his shelf. You have toys.
Shit.
Yeah, you have toys you've built on your shelf. Noah has books.
Yeah.
Fantastic. God, I wish it was like you guys. Look at, like, even the Star Wars shit behind you.
It's
cliche and cool all at the same time.
This one actually flies. I got it to fly once, but I'm afraid to fly it ever again. I had to custom make a quadcopter built into a paper DeLorean.
No, how do you deal with this guy? Seriously, I mean, how do you deal with him?
We just talk once a week on the podcast. That's pretty much
can you
it.
tell them about the podcast? Tell the people watching about the podcast, so where they can find you guys.
Yeah,
if they like you.
We've launched a podcast. It's on Apple and Spotify. We'll eventually figure out how to actually publish it to other places. It's called The Fourth Age. We're talking about AI and the computer revolution. Basically, my contention is that we had the plow, we had the steam engine, computers are a bigger deal. AI is sort of showing that to the world, and we should expect, just as with those two revolutions, societies, cultures, and economies had to change. We should expect that to happen to us as well.
So that's really, really interesting, because Bobby and I are both late 50s. I'm not trying to make a joke out of that. We just simply are. So if you I assume you guys are early 30s probably, right?
Early 40s.
Early 40s.
Late 40s, in fact.
Oh,
I'd
really?
say all of us look great.
Okay.
Frank.
Yeah, I'd say all of us look
great.
absolutely great. We should actually spend the next 5 minutes telling each other how great we look. But anyway, in my almost 60 years, the way that the internet has changed everything, to me, is staggering. And I think if you take a step back and think about it from 1978, like if Bobby and I were transported back to 1978, I'm not even certain we could survive. I mean, I think the world is so different then. Our minds are trained so differently. So, Marty, I'll start. The first question is you. When people think of AI, it elicits a bunch of emotions. From some people, it elicits fear that it's coming for the jobs. For some people, it elicits fear that it's coming to control them. Others think it's going to be a cool tool for them to use. A fourth group think it's a tool that they're going to be the tool that AI uses. How do you view AI?
So it's funny, I had a story from my dad who was at Caltech in the 60s, and apparently back in the 60s, they were certain that by the 70s they'd have it solved. So it's been, for the longest time, the perfect vaporware. And then when I was at Pinterest, we didn't like the term AI because it was sort of a bad word, because it always meant somebody who's a little too crazy, because AI, that's ridiculous. So machine learning. in data science and statistics. And so we used a lot of that at Pinterest for fighting spam, for recommendations, all these things. You didn't even use neural nets. The current thing we're talking about that is behind ChatGPT and these other things is a neural net, almost like a simulation of our neurons. And we use far simpler things, because the problem with a neural net is that you don't know what the hell's going on with it. You know how when we look at our brains and we try to study our brains, they say, look, we have a EEG and that little part lit up when we poked them over here. It's kind of like trying to study a computer by seeing what blinky lights are going off when you throw a rock at it from across the room. We would use other technologies at the time that would allow us to understand what was wrong with the model, but it wasn't very good. They were okay. Then at Reddit in 2015, I was talking to an AI guy, and he was a guy obsessed with machine learning, and he said, yeah, we're just going to neural nets. We don't know what the hell's going on, but they're just working. And then actually Noah and I were doing a talk for a conference, and we had originally thought about just doing it on machine learning and data science, and then Stable Diffusion. Have you guys seen Stable Diffusion, by the way? Are you familiar with that and Midjourney?
I have
sure.
I've used Midjourney. I actually have.
Yeah.
Midjourney
most
to
of the
me
time you've been talking a different language to me, but I'm trying to keep up.
Well, so for people out there,
if I could, Midjourney, for anyone who doesn't know, if you're looking to create AI images and you know nothing, Midjourney is really good. Like some of the images I've created, I don't even know what to do with them. I just go on for hours and create images.
Yeah, so where most people have heard of ChatGPT, you write text and it gives back text. Midjourney and Stable Diffusion and a couple other products are you write text, you write sort of like what you want and what you don't want, and it will. And then there's different kinds of models for different kinds of styles, and it will give you back these images that are ridiculous. So good in every different style, realistic, which is wild because it somewhat Noah very rightfully cautions me here. I want to say the word, it seems to understand fabric folds and physics and all that, but it's somehow simulating that so that it looks perfect. You can do anime style, you can do simple line drawings, all these crazy things, and then it'll spit out an image for you. So the problem with these, to your question, this is something that Noah and I explore, is it's going to cause, or if it's not already causing, a revolution. It's difficult to say what's on the other side of that revolution, but one thing you can say, and we can look back at the Industrial Revolution and other revolutions, is it will cause a lot of havoc. So Midjourney and Stable Diffusion and others are causing a massive problem for the art world. A lot of artists are losing their jobs. Deepfakes for audio are killing the jobs for voiceover artists. ChatGPT is, we were talking before the podcast a little bit about, using it for simple writing contracts and things like that. So lawyers are losing jobs. I've used it in the past with another company to help write grants, so that those jobs are going. And so the scary thing is we're going to have this big societal thunk, almost surely, if it's not already happening. This is where we like to explore, well, how do we help everybody through that thunk? And how do we set up even a world? This is where Noah should jump in. How do we set up structures so that we can wade through this revolution better?
Well, this is actually what I was going to ask Noah, because Marty, you said that Noah cautions you on saying that AI understands folds, for example, as images. Yep. Noah, why do you caution him? Like, what's wrong with using the word understand? That's what I assume you caution him on.
Yeah, pretty much. So, as you mentioned, I studied nuclear engineering in college. I got out and needed a job, and we don't really build nuclear reactors in this country. So I got a job in computer programming because it was 2000 and all you needed to do was pulse. So I started studying the math and got really fascinated by computational mathematics. There's a phase transition that happens to your head, basically, once you understand the implications of what allows us to build computers in the first place. And I've been following along with the OpenAI and the Google DeepMind group and other AI things that have been sort of happening in the background for decades. And it's misleading to use anthropomorphized language to describe these things. We have tendencies as humans to see action as human action. So we ascribe intention to things, and we ask why, when lightning strikes, near our house, who did that to me? In cases what you're looking at is not an intentional behavior. It's just an incomprehensible outcome of a complicated universe. And
so Noah, can I jump in if you don't mind?
Sure.
Please hold that thought. But I want to make sure that my brain's getting this right, because my brain is geometrically smaller than yours. From a perspective of, so in markets, Jimmy and I have experienced this before where we've like put on a trade and then Jerome Powell says something and our trade turns from a winning trade to a losing trade. And you're like, if it wasn't for what Jerome Powell did to me, that trade would have been fine. Is that sort of the same thing? Because Jerome Powell doesn't know who I am.
It's somewhat, although in the case of markets, and this is where my real expertise sort of comes to a full flowering, it really is all intentional. There are actually people that are actually doing these things, and that's what makes the market function. Is that the market is pulling together human intention and sort of distilling that out. And what we've actually been seeing, Marty was talking about Midjourney and ChatGPT, of course, but BlackRock, Renaissance Technologies, and God knows how many other hedge funds have been deploying market AI programs into the marketplace for decades now at varying levels of technology and in ways that are very opaque. And all of those things have been destabilizing the marketplace because they're generating effectively noise. They don't have true human intention. And so the market's becoming overwhelmed because we cannot tell the difference between a inhuman inspired buy or sell order and a human desire to buy or sell. My contention is that we actually need to restructure markets to be able to be indifferent to that inability. I would say that that's probably the basic model that we're going to need to pursue across all major social institutions is...
So, Noah, can I ask you a quick question here? Several years ago, me and some of the guys, the traders, we always joke like it's almost like the algos have digested every bit of technical analysis and they know where my stops are. You're saying it's not my imagination. They have digested every bit of technical analysis and they do know where my stops are.
Absolutely. Yes.
It's worth a lot of money.
No question about it.
A lot of my money.
A lot of your money.
Yeah. Yes. It's in fact even worse than that because with the sort of technical algos plus the speed of the modern markets, the cost of just injecting noise into the system goes down. So you can create a opaque, even to yourself, trading strategy that causes the market to be less predictable. People who are behaving in predictable fashions will find themselves getting stopped out just by random chance. There's not happened. This is just how the world works now. The markets.
Oh, well, I mean, there was a market drop due to this, if I recall correctly.
Well, so
the algorithms went nuts.
Crash, maybe.
Right. The flash crash. Is that what you're speaking of, Marty?
We see daily flash crashes in isolated things as a result of these types of strategies. We'll see a lot more and a lot wilder behaviors in the market. A few years ago, like the VIX compressed while the market was going crazy, while the news cycle was going crazy. It was like, how could it possibly be that there's no volatility when nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow? That's a noise play. The algos are going to evolve to make the markets less useful because the existing marketplace offers a greater total share of the economy to traders, the less useful the marketplace is.
One defense of the word understand that is kind of a fun discussion Noah and I are having is you can anthropomorphize it perhaps if you get to this discussion about is there a person in the box. So we have ChatGPT. It seems to be creative. It seems to have depth and breadth of knowledge. There was Bing Chat, which seemed to show emotion, even angry emotion and retributive emotion. And so one of the things Noah and I are exploring is, well, at what point is it either artificially general intelligence or at least perceived to be artificial and general intelligence? And in that case, are we indistinguishable from a being? And in that case, can you say the word understands and have it actually represent some creature that's understanding?
All right. So before I go into another direction with this, I have to do this because it just seems, I don't know if I even know how to do this. I want to try and show you guys something here. If you asked Midjourney to do a picture of Marty, it would look like this. Do you guys see what I'm seeing here?
Oh, that's totally me, except it looks better. Yeah.
It's Aaron Rodgers.
Wow. Yeah. Look at that.
Yeah. So if you asked Midjourney to draw a Marty picture, they draw Aaron Rodgers.
That's what it did.
If you ask them to draw Aaron Rodgers, they draw Marty. So, okay, back to things that actually to me, that matters a lot. You mentioned ChatGPT, and we were talking about this before, and I want to bring up the story again that one of the theories I had was that ChatGPT and the like was going to replace more white collar jobs. Sort of the fear of the robot replacing blue collar jobs is actually now placed onto AI and the white collar jobs. And one example I always gave is something that actually happened in my life. Jim's heard this story before. I told you guys before we started recording, but I needed a legal document, and I needed it quickly because I was getting something installed in my house. I needed an easement. I just went to ChatGPT and said, create an easement that has XYZ in it. And it created one. And my neighbor signed it. Everything went fine. And later on, I showed it in a casual way to an attorney friend. He said, yeah, this is great. You don't need anything else. Who wrote this? And I said, I did. But I took the credit, of course, for it. And I've also used it to structure things. One day I was writing a piece on whether the U.S. Was going into a recession or not. Okay, this was for a client. I mentioned that the EU had already been in a recession, but they still use the old definition of 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, and they do. Then I said, well, okay, so who still uses this, right? So I went into ChatGPT in this instance, and I said, what respectable institutions and governments use the definition of a recession as 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth? And it mentioned the IMF, the World Bank, and the EU. And then it spit out, but there are also different things that make a recession a recession. And I literally looked at the screen and said, I didn't fucking ask you that. Okay. And so then I'm sitting here going, okay, is this thing trying to tell me that just asking that question is an incomplete question? And then I'm sitting here going, wow, I think it's a person. So,
and it's being politicized.
Yeah, well, that's what I was.
That's your point, right?
Yeah. Noah, go ahead and jump in.
So the thing is, it can't not be politicized.
Is it the writers of the code, or is it that I'm thinking of it wrong?
So it's possible that they actually put filters in for this specific reason because of their specific political affiliations. But at its core, what the thing is designed to do is take a look at text and figure out what's supposed to go with what. And so if they have a very large corpus, because until fairly recently, temporally speaking, the Fed used 2 negative quarters of growth, and then we had that, and there was a massive push out and redefinition at the Fed and the Treasury to say that there's other things that you can use. And so if ChatGPT has 51% of its corpus data talking about recessions, press releases and stories from that period from the Fed, then it will 51% think that the way that you describe a recession is other things can be recessions. If all of the corpus of data that it was handed was from the 90s, when nobody said anything other than 2 negative quarters, then it would say 2 negative quarters is a recession. That's all there is. And it wouldn't feel the need to sort of go into any other detail. It's taking on the character of some kind of weighted average of all of the inputs that were used to build it. And OpenAI hasn't been particularly forthcoming about what the inputs were. Because of the way the training works, it's probably impossible to actually work out what the weighted averages are, because that would be imputed inside the weights that are inside the system, which, as Marty mentioned, are so complicated that we can't actually understand what they mean. It's not a case where it's like, I got Shakespeare and that's got a 0.1, and then I got War and Peace and that's got a 0.1, and then I got the New York Times from, July 3rd, 1741, and that's got a 0.02. Like, that's not what the weights are. The weights are this complex network of behaviors to sort of figure out what symbols it should come up with next. And it's not computationally feasible, which is how computer scientists like to say impossible, to work out what the connections between those things are. This is a thing that happens. We could change the opinions of ChatGPT, or they could change the opinions of ChatGPT, by giving it entirely new corpus of data. If you, say, took the entire output of Harvard's anthropology department for the last 20 years, that's certainly not particularly similar to what they actually trained it on, but it would take on whatever those opinions were. If you instead chose Harvard's anthropology department for 20 years from 100 years ago, not only would it not resemble what it does now, it also wouldn't resemble what it would, anthropology has basically turned itself 180 degrees over the last century. So
this, I'm going to switch back to Marty for a second here, because in one of the podcasts I was listening to, you talked about things like humor and sarcasm. When I use ChatGPT and ask them to write something, and I do, it comes out as like a brilliant sixth grader who's kind of afraid to go against the grain. Do you anticipate learning that? And again, and I'll like in music too, when they started to replace like real horns with synthesized horns in the 80s and 90s. It was the imperfection that gave the music soul. I guess I'm trying to make an argument for even in writing, even in music, there's no possible way, is there, to replicate sarcasm, humor, the imperfections that make it real?
First thing you should realize about ChatGPT is it is this crazy. Someone drew a picture of it, and I wish I had brought it along with me. Think of it like a large alien with multiple eyes and faces and mouths, and it's just insane. And then they stick this little happy face on the front of it, and that's what you see on ChatGPT interface. But if you ever went back and looked at Bing Chat, so Bing Chat is the same technology, just Bing put it out there, and they didn't put any guard on it, and it gaslit, it threatened. There was one case where somebody had even posted to Twitter about how, I don't know, almost threatening Bing Chat, and Bing Chat said, I'm going to come and find you, and it was threatening the person. That kind of looked a lot like whether or not it actually has emotions, at least mimicking emotions. So what we're seeing is that it may already have all of this, but it's heavily guarded. In terms of creativity, I've seen some crazy stuff. Acrostic poems, the ones where you give it a word like board game, and it will give you a poem with the where the first letter of every line is from the word. It does a phenomenal job. In fact, really? I've used it a couple of times.
There was actually a university professor just in the last couple of weeks that teaches creative writing classes and gives his students a creativity test, and gave ChatGPT the creativity test, and ChatGPT did better than his average student did on that creativity test. So you were talking about the kind of shift from blue collar to white collar threat. I've said this many, many times. I'm sure I'll say it again. The easiest jobs in our society to replace with computers are the ones at the top.
Plumbers are safe.
Well,
maybe, but it's a lot harder.
Like President of the United States, the Supreme Justice, the Justice of the Supreme Court, legislatures,
the Federal Reserve, please.
Federal Reserve. These are people that take in information, think about it, and make a decision. And what do computers do? They take in information, they make a computation, and they print out an output. And so
you guys then agree, Noah, with we had Luke Grahman on probably about a year ago now, Jimmy.
Yep.
Luke Grahman writes a really well-respected newsletter, if you don't know who he is, called Forest for the Trees. A brilliant, brilliant guy. And he said the future is where plumbers and construction workers make more than lawyers and doctors.
Programmers also, there's a thing called Copilot. I don't know if you guys have seen that. I believe it's based on GPT-4, and I've used it as a programmer to kind of play with it. You start writing a function, and it starts to write it for you. It writes it well. It writes it commented. It even gives you a little bit of background chatter about why it made some decisions. What we now started to see, I know programmers that say that they're 2x faster. And whether or not that's replacing directly the jobs of programmers, it's certainly, if you've got a more efficient team by 50%, you don't have to hire as many people. So those are jobs that are now already lost. So they're coming for Noah and I.
On the backs of that, I was listening to your regulation show, which I really, really enjoyed. These guys, for anyone watching, did a show on potential AI regulation. And one of the points you guys made was that the human brain still has much more capacity than the current levels of AI. If I'm saying anything wrong, please correct me when I finally give you a chance to speak.
Yeah, you're on.
And that was number one. And then number two was that, so you talked about how you can, like, all your other senses can go quiet when you're visually processing information. You guys remember that part of the conversation?
Yeah,
And the reason I bring it up, and this is not just a reason for me to say that I was a really good high school football player, but when I played high school football, I was on the offense in one particular game. They put me on defense just because we were winning by so much, and they wanted to get somebody else in my position on offense. They put me on defense. And I got a fluke interception. When I was running the interception back, I couldn't hear anything. Like, it was silent. And I still tell this story. All I could hear was my breathing and my pads, as in my mind, I've just run 60 yards. I actually ran 6. Right? Like, my brain completely calculated everything incorrectly. But what that particular episode of your show Wow, it does sound like I just wanted to say I played
Well,
football.
I was going to say too, on the heels of that, I was a linebacker, and I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, so perfect.
Yeah.
So you guys were making me not afraid of AI in that particular episode. And you were saying that the regulatory side of it may be less complex, if I understood that correctly. Am I wrong on that, Noah?
I think the regulations, the only way that we're going to be able to get regulations that can function is for them to be clear and open enough that we can actually understand them and align them with our own interests. And our current technique of using regulatory through government isn't up to standard, because we need things that are literally mathematically simple and mathematically solid in order to be able to cope with the capacities of computers being able to throw things at the wall. I would caution, people who are like, well, doctors are on the way out and plumbers are the way to go. I would imagine that medicine could be considerably upgraded by taking a look at what the information and services involved in medicine are, taking it apart and putting together actual valuable professions within that phase and doing that. The other side for plumbing, one undersung in this conversation of AI, is what it might be able to do with 3D printing. That's a rapidly advancing piece of technology as well. Imagine getting to the point where construction is mostly being conducted by building scale 3D printing, at which point plumbing might be a situation where it's sort of a modular in-out, where you would sort of get a new wet wall printed and installed in order to deal with plumbing mistakes.
I asked you to start it off with, and I'm still not clear where you stand on this answer. When you envision 20 years from now, do you believe that AI is going to make our lives better or make us more inactive? And is the inactivity going to create happiness, less happiness? Where's your emotional stance on this?
So let me start with a story about why I have such a hard time, and I think nobody has a view of what this might be.
Okay.
One of my favorite examples, Noah and I talk about this a lot, is imagine go 100 years ago, 1923, and you're going to have culture shock the same way if I were to go to the middle of, rural area of China. I just don't know the language. I don't know the customs. I don't even know how to probably buy food. If you go back to the 20s, same thing. Noah was joking with me about it and said people would be aghast at the fact that I'm not wearing a hat, although at the moment I am. But there's customs that you're used to, and things don't make sense. I mean, if you go back to the 20s, there was segregation. I mean, we would be blown away. It'd be crazy. If we do the same thing going forward, I think we would experience that in 100 years. Now, here's the crazy part. Suppose AI is getting to a point where it's thinking like a human, but it's 2x faster or 10x faster, or let's say 100x faster. Then it would not be a crazy, leap to say in 1 year it will have gone 100 years. So does that mean in 1 year of AI thinking, if that existed, that it's already 100 years past us? And so does it have the same ethics we have? It might say we're uncouth, 100-year-old relics. And so that's why I find it so difficult to even fathom. And you see this also with, revolutions. Noah, you mentioned gin mills during the Industrial Revolution. Things were just so awful that people walked around just drinking all day long.
One of the things, when people left the farm and went to the cities, they were making a lot more money, but the culture that they had that ordered their lives didn't exist anymore, because they weren't living in the small town that their parents had been born in and their grandparents had been born in and so on. They were in an urban environment. They couldn't sort of go out for a walk and get away from people because there wasn't any of that around. Gin mills, push carts that sold bottles of gin to people, more or less a daily wage, were a thing. And people would simply drink down a dozen plus units of hard liquor, get completely blotto, and go unconscious and wake up the next day. And
so I have some first-hand experience on that. It's not a good plan long term.
There's a number of reasons this happens. I mean, you lose your job. That's most likely going to happen to a lot of people. Noah and I have talked about one of the things that also happens is you just lose, things are just different. The way you interact with the world is not, people talk about kids these days and talk about how awful it is. Well, imagine that happens to all of us in about a year because things don't make sense anymore. So I feel for certain that there's going to be a lot of difficulty for a lot of people. The question is, well, what's it going to look like on the other side? And that's where Noah and I actually have 2 episodes just focusing on the writings of sci-fi authors to say, well, what if today there's AGI? What does it look like soon? Or what if there was AGI a year ago? And so we've explored Terminator, that's obviously not a good ending. We've explored Star Trek, that's a good one. They're in service of us, these AGI that you talk to the computer and it gets you, a soda. And we talked about things like Wall-E, where we're all sitting around fat, dumb, and happy on little futuristic inner tubes floating around with all of our needs met. It's very dystopic. I'll take that over Terminator. And then there's, 10 million others. So I don't mean to dodge your question too much. I could say for certain there's going to be pain. It's almost, I'd say anybody who gives you a picture of what it's going to look like in 20 years is bullshitting you. It's one view.
Right. No, and I just sometimes, like when I think about the psychology of it, because I'm a firm, full-on believe that the pursuit, the sweat and equity put into achieving goals is part of the happiness. I don't think there's such a thing as needs met happiness. You know what I mean? I think that just means fat and lazy and mentally lazy, and that bums me out a lot.
First of all, I want to tell you, as soon as you mentioned gin mill, I keep Googling gin mills for sale because I would love to own an actual old gin mill.
Yeah.
Just to kind of push it around my neighborhood at times.
400 years old. I'm not sure how many are surviving. My take is that we have a choice, basically. We, the human species, has a choice about what we're going to do. There's a few different options. One is full abandonment of the technology, and we could sort of keep our civilization if we did that. And full abandonment means no more pocket calculators, no more iPhones, no more computers.
Silly, obviously, but yes.
Yeah. Well, that's Dune style, right?
Yeah.
Right.
People that believe it. Yeah.
Option 2 is a dark age. We don't change our society, and we watch as our institutions get ripped apart by the noise and fervor and other things. And option 3 is we build new institutions. Human beings have done all of these things in the past. The Anabaptists, the Amish are very famous for choosing to abandon technology. The Romans didn't build new institutions, and they had a dark age. And English and Northern Europeans that developed the Enlightenment built new institutions and stopped being ruled by kings and changed religions and changed cultures and changed what people did for work. We think of jobs as very important. Jobs are a recent innovation in human history. And when it was happening, the lords that had serfs had a lot of what to them were very persuasive arguments why it was terrible that people were going to have jobs. Just as in this country, there's a lot of thinking that you can find from the pre-Civil War South about how horrible it would be if slavers were forced into the marketplace. To our ears, these things sound crazy, and they are, but to the ears of the people that will be living with institutions that function better, our cries of "what about my job" will sound just as crazy as their cries of "what about my slave."
Okay, so two-part question then. Number one, we had a whole show on UBI and universal basic income.
Yes.
And it sounds like, Noah, that you're saying that the people who are saying, "what about my job" will sound crazy because there's people, and again, I'm not attributing this to Scott Santerns because I don't remember him saying this, but there are UBI people that say, why do we need jobs? Why can't we just have our needs met? And then we can paint and write poetry and create music. None of which I'm good at, by the way.
Me neither, and I'm kind of with Jim on the no needs met happiness. I'm very negative UBI in general because all the proposals I've seen look like stopgap measurements to keep the existing game going for the people that are winning it. It's almost like, well, what if we gave comps to the degenerate gamblers so they stayed in the casino gambling because we keep making money? It's not impossible that a completely different form of some kind of UBI might be able to have a role in certain activities. There might be organizations for which it would be appropriate. Monks living in monasteries have UBI-like things that seem to work out in those frames. I think there's plenty of work to do and plenty of contributions for humans to make to human interest, human happiness, and human accomplishment. I just think that the institutions we're currently using are wasting most of that. And I think it would be silly and wasteful to take people like myself who just do math for fun and turn us into poets and painters, because I'm not good at either of those things.
Yeah, nobody wants me doing the things that I'm good at. Okay, people, you want me working, believe me. But the second thing, and you all laughing means you've been stereotyping me, and you've been correct. So, second part of
Well, because Bobby, hold on, let me stop you right there. Because the moment I thought, if you and I went back to 1923, we'd have knocked on Alphonse Capone's door and said, "Listen, we got to take over from Johnny Torrio right now." But anyway,
it would not have been good. It would not have been good. So the second part of the question is then, do you guys believe, and we can go to Marty first, do you guys believe that this is then a situation similar to the internet where people were like afraid of the internet, saying it's going to take our jobs, and it created new jobs, right? Do you think AI is the same, where we just don't understand what those new jobs, or for lack of a better word, roles are going to look like for people?
I hope so. I'm hoping that just like in the industrial revolution, that blacksmiths go away, but now you have iron workers times a million, because now you can build railroads and all the other things that came later. And I know there was an interesting exhibit about what happened across the Industrial Revolution, and silverware used to be expensive, and not everybody had plates, and now everybody has plates. And so there's entire industries that pop up, and then with the internet, obviously huge industries. My industry is popped up. I don't know what I'd be doing if it didn't exist. No, I guess I can't say I'm certain that it's going to happen with AI, because I guess it depends on if the story is up. If everybody's job goes away, and then we have a problem. But if the AI allows us to spend more time on our passions, on art and other things, and do them exponentially faster. So for instance, I'm lousy at art, and if I want to express myself, it's difficult to do it. But if I have Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, suddenly I can express myself. Now it democratizes that expression, and so it could open up a whole new world if it doesn't take it away.
I think the challenges are different for this, because the internet is a continuation of a technology that was really a couple centuries in the tooth at that point. We'd already had telecommunication with telegraphy in the early 1800s, and the first transatlantic cable was laid more than 150 years ago. The internet, sort of getting computers connected into that network, was a very, very small step, and you saw how big that step has actually been. AI really has the potential to get computational mechanics into the common hands. And even most computer programmers don't take advantage of the computational capabilities of computers. It's a very complicated subject to deal with. Just to take sort of, one example, Go, a game that human beings have literally spent thousands of years attempting to get better at, went from a game where you could train a motivated human being in a couple of weeks from virtually zero knowledge to essentially being able to beat the best computer programs, to not merely being stronger than top human players, but getting stronger faster than top human players. After training itself by playing against itself, more or less, for a few hours.
It just blew my mind. Go ahead.
These sorts of capabilities, as they spread out, create an entirely new idea about what capabilities even are. Meta has released open source ChatGPT-like programs that can run on commonly available home hardware. So imagine a scenario where it becomes popular to download and install that and hook it up to one or more Twitter feeds. And we have a scenario where vastly more computing power than OpenAI or Microsoft or Amazon or Google or all of these, or all the things combined, are involved in a open discussion to train themselves. This is a thing that people could just start doing if they felt like it. We couldn't really even imagine what would result out of that probably within a month.
So we talked earlier about rolling this into economics, rolling it into the Federal Reserve. I mean, the notion, and again, I'm just, every once in a while a light bulb goes off for me, which means it went off for you guys about 5 years ago. For economics, you could just realistically have like 100 different indicators that are monitored at the same time, like, car loan delinquencies, revolving credit card debt, people who are rolling instead of paying, 100 different things.
It's radically simpler than that. It's radically simpler
Exactly.
than that.
Go.
So I've
Yeah.
actually developed this. It's patent pending. The U.S. government doesn't even know what to do with it. They've said yes twice. They took both of them back. Basically, what I figured out is that deals aren't about a buyer and a seller. They've got three components. They've got the thing being bought, they've got the currency it takes to buy it, and they've got the information. And so I created three different marketplaces, one for producers that want to make delivery, one for consumers that want to take delivery, and one for information. All the things you're talking about, all the indicators that people can either train up things to look at, or you can just personally have an interest in and go check out. You accumulate all that into your beliefs about where prices are heading. And the system integrates all of those beliefs together into a supermind that tells everybody what the price is. And then the supermind gets tested by how much people that want to buy and people that want to buy and sell at the prices that it's negotiated for them. You can create an entire marketplace that has a lower overall transaction cost and higher stability than existing markets. Costs way less to operate, generates way more revenue for the operators than any marketplace today does. And at the same time, gives those negotiator forecasters ridiculously high rates of return because you don't have to take on leverage anymore. You now get all of your information auto-levered across the entire marketplace because everybody's paying you for the information that you're providing that was useful to them. It's a four-way win.
It just dawned on me, and Bobby, I'll put this to you as well. Like Federal Reserve, you could, an intricate system like that could dictate their moves, but they'll never. The problem always comes back is they never relinquish power, and the power comes from appointing your buddies to be the Fed chair. So the four of us could come and say we have an absolutely drastically better way to institute Fed policy, and they just tell us to go fuck ourselves, right, Bobby? Isn't that's what it would be?
Yeah, and this is like the whole point to me is like you see, where else you see this kind of thinking, Jimmy, the kind of thinking you just talked about is people who are against self-driving cars. Now, I may be naive, but I kind of can't wait for that. And I mentioned this in the last show because I still drink. So for me, like a self-driving car that I owned would be amazing. It's like, I go and I have a few drinks, I have my car take me home. And I always think that at least in my experience, in almost every case, the human makes the mistake, right? And, they publicize these Tesla car crashes. And the first thing they want to do is talk about, well, was it on autopilot when it crashed? And it's like, how many times does somebody crash in like a Chevy Blazer and they're just driving it like an idiot? They don't publicize those and they say, well, was it being driven by an idiot as opposed to it being driven on autopilot? So, I mean, Marty, am I wrong on that from a technology standpoint that like getting excited about something like self-driving is dumb?
Oh, I think it's excellent. One of the things that's interesting to me about self-driving cars is one of the things they talk about, in driver's ed, if suddenly a rock falls in front of you, what is your stopping time? I think a quarter second of it is just our brain. So that quarter second we get back. And then not only that, it has self-awareness of all the things around it. So at nanoseconds, it could figure out, well, I'm just going to get into the left lane or into the shoulder. To our discussion about what is it going to look like on the other side? I think self-driving cars are going to enable a lot of things that we can't even imagine. So yes, getting home from the bar, aging parents who can no longer drive, they could still be independent. Maybe even kids going to school, right? They could just hop on the car and it'll take them. I'm thinking, yes, on one side, it's going to be horrific for the driving, the trucker industry is going to collapse. And that's a huge number of jobs, probably first, I think, and the cab industry, the Uber and Lyft industry. But on the other side, are you going to have a whole industry? One of the startups I wanted to build, but I didn't want to deal with the logistics was, okay, suppose you have self-driving cars yesterday. I'm going to make a parking lot in the inexpensive area of San Francisco, and your car will drive over to me. I will, we'll have people, we'll clean it, we'll change the oil, we'll do all sorts of things. Your car drives back to you later. And then you can also, that covers parking, which is whatever it is, $20 a day in San Francisco. So it starts to open up an entire new industry and ideas we can't even imagine. I'm thinking if we had self-driving cars yesterday, what startups would we want? We no longer have to have we can have alcohol in the car possibly, and we could actually rearrange the car so now it's like a living room, and you sit there and you have fun while you get where you're going. I can't imagine what apps are going to pop up, just the dynamic of driving changing.
So then back to what Jimmy was asking, like from perspective of them not giving up power, right? Because my point in bringing that up was that I would happily give up the power of driving my car, Noah. Is this where what you're talking about, building new institutions then, to Jimmy's point?
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
You could very easily do it, very simply take care of the problems, but they're hanging on to it like Rome did.
Well, that's where it's a choice. Some of these things we can build outside of the existing norms. Some of these things we'll have to take it away from them. But the established way of doing things is broken at a mathematical level. It's not about which side of the political divide you're on. It's not about who the people are. It's not about competence. It's about we learned something new about how addition and multiplication works about 90 years ago now. That wasn't anything anybody expected to be true. And all of our existing institutions are based on it being false. And we are slowly learning how those institutions break in the face of the truth. And they will break, and they are breaking. I hope that we have it within ourselves to do what we have to do to get these things going. It's a choice. I'm offering a path of new institutions and trying to get interest in that. But if people would prefer a dark age or prefer the Amish solution, then that will happen instead.
Can I have some time to think about it? First, I have to decide.
I hope so. I think
So,
you do have some time.
I thought of two things. Like if we had fully reliable AI self-driving cars right now, first of all, it would immediately take away the reason to own cars, by the way, because bear with me for a second. I believe that on average, 90% of the cars owned in this car are inactive at any one time. The heaviest rush hour traffic, it's like, and I'm making up these numbers, but I've read them in the past. I'm not that far off. Even the most, like 70% of the cars in the Chicago area are just parked and not moving, even in rush hour. The point is that if all of a sudden you could, like just Uber on steroids, most of what we pay on Uber is for the driver wages. If everybody, like essentially a town could share the same fleet of 1,000 cars, right? I mean, and also what about regional airlines? All of a sudden, if you had a car and had sweet seats, you finish dinner, go to sleep in your car and wake up in St. Louis if you needed to be there, wake up in Miami. Those things, that like the disruption of it is amazing. Yes, Marty?
Yeah, and there would need to be new jobs for all the people who have to change the tires, because now the cars are possibly driving a lot more. All these things are going to pop up.
Yeah, that's a great point. So that's what you got to figure out, where the disruption comes.
Yeah. I love playing these games of what if it was here today, what would be the startup? Because it takes a little time to build that startup. Us technologists have gotten it wrong so many times that I might spend a good 6 months working on it and it'll never actually come.
Right. And it's so funny how just the psychology of it. I was thinking what's going to be destroyed, and you immediately went to what's going to be created. And that's, I think, pretty interesting, by the way.
Well, another point in favor of continued car ownership is we currently use cars as a personalized transport device, but they are machines that have engines attached to them, much as tractors are, for example. What if AI self-driving exists? How could the AI self-driving cars be moderated in such a way that they'd be functional robotic actuators that could do useful and valuable work? And what useful and valuable work might you want them to be doing? So what if your car also could manicure your lawn or grow a garden for you? And so it was under continuous operation because the AI was capable of using it as both a car and a tractor.
So it's funny to me on the car part, and then I actually want to bring it back to markets if I could. But what's funny to me about the car part, Jimmy, is that like I'm me, right? And I have a car with a ridiculously large engine, and I like the way it sounds, and I like to try and take turns and make sure I can control the back end of it and stuff. And when I think about self-driving cars, my mind shift completely changes to, could I get a couch that folds out? I have no interest in how fast it goes. I'm like, could I get like 2 flat screens in the corner and have 2 different games going on, and have a little gin mill that pulls up, pops on the side of the car?
How can I need a gin mill? Yeah,
completely changes my mind. I would totally want to own that. I wouldn't necessarily want to use the public ones, but the whole idea of what a car is changes, and I never thought of it that way until you guys put it sort of in this context. But back to markets, if I could, is it okay if I go back to markets real quick?
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Guys, can AI eliminate the profitability of markets? And the reason I say that is Jimmy and I came up talking to and working with traders that were all day long doing a trade called swaps versus futures, for lack of a better name. Right. And there was a gap between the swaps price in the cash market and the futures price. It's not important to know what that is, but Noah, you probably do. But as people got faster and faster at it, it just shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk till, from a perspective of the futures contract, it virtually went away. The trade went away, right? Now, a lot of it's done in the options markets and things like that. But can AI bring so many participants into the market with the speed of high frequency tech and sort of kind of arbitrage these things away so that markets almost don't matter anymore?
There's sort of two answers to your question. The first answer is that AI is already driving the profitability out of markets, and that's actually what's causing them to fail. The second answer is that markets at their core are about human decision making and bringing information that's economically relevant to economic actors. And so we don't have an alternative to markets to provide that information. Profitability is what drives economic decision making. And so if you have markets that are not providing profits, then your economic decision making becomes insane. And that's one of the things that causes your society to collapse, is when you don't have an economy anymore. So the answer is that we are going to need to build markets that are proof against AI, which is currently driving profit out of the marketplace. We can build markets that would increase profitability of the markets and create better markets with AI included that would function better and provide better information to ourselves. It's not a process of doing more of what we're doing harder. It's a process of learning about what the math is, figuring out a new optimization, and actually building these institutions both physically with the actual procedures in place to do the things, and regulatorily the operators are operating the markets and not, putting together some kind of weird Ponzi scheme.
Is NVIDIA, are their chips, AI chips, really, right now, have they taken on the proxy role as being just the future of AI? Are there other companies that are doing work that is amazing to you guys? Marty, you want to take that first?
A lot of times we talk about, do you go after the gold or do you go after the pickaxe? And I think NVIDIA went after the pickaxe and nailed it. This stuff was, for graphics, turned out to be really fantastic for Bitcoin mining. So the last couple of years, you couldn't even buy their cards. And then suddenly AI, they have hit it out of the park repeatedly. And now I think they're actually going to get into AI for themselves. I don't know of anybody else who's quite nearly as good of a competitor or any kind of a competitor for them at the moment.
Noah, do you have the same answer?
Well, not quite. So I would say that their ability to brand their graphics cards as AI chips is pretty amazing. They got really good at making linear algebra computers.
Floating point math.
At the same time, we figured out a lot of ways to turn a lot of different kinds of problems into linear algebra problems. So it was sort of a nice meeting. However, there are, and I'm not going to be able to remember their names, but there are at least two different people that are working on analog chip things to do large matrix multiplication problems. The problem with analog chips is that they lack the precision of digital chips, but for an AI system, which is actually wants the nonlinearity and needs the speed, that's not really a disadvantage. And so there have been some proof of concept chips that achieve better than graphics card behavior in training model action. And there are at least two companies that I've read stories about that are attempting to build these kinds of chips.
Noah, my knowledge on this is a little hazy, but if I recall correctly, neural nets also nicely map to a quantum optimization problem. So if quantum computers become a thing,
that's another one.
Then we're at next level.
There's a Canadian company that's using approach quantum annealing that has multiple tenable claims of what's known as quantum supremacy. That is a quantum system that's outperforming existing non-quantum systems.
Bobby, my level of understanding what the fuck these two are talking about is like a 55%. What do you got? Are you more than me or
but
no?
it's just because I want to be better than you.
Okay, well,
Okay.
I could lightly explain it like, actually, Noah probably has a better intuition on this, but I think of, classical computers are what we're used to every day. Quantum computers are going to be so much, I don't know if faster is the right word, so much more powerful. We're talking about one of the big problems is that cryptography, which all the banks in the world use, some of the algorithms they use today will immediately be useless. That kind of level of massive computation.
It's amazing. What I was thinking about when we were talking about this, because some of this is a little bit scary, a little bit overwhelming. And the restaurant I owned, we talked about the 20s, the 30s. It's stuck in 1930 when it was opened.
It's
And
awesome.
I honestly believe that tons
That's
of people
awesome.
from the tech industry come there, and it's just like you come there to just forget all this bullshit for an hour and a half. You know what I mean? This is our job. I mean, I like tech. I'm in tech. But when I go there, it's like, shut this all down. Let's have a cold beer and a frosted mug.
I love that
talk
stuff.
about bullshit.
I
Yeah,
like
one of
to
the
go
things-
sit downstairs at his restaurant where you can't get a cell.
Yeah.
You can't even get a
There's
cell
a signal
service.
down there. It's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, I spent 20 years in Silicon Valley, and a thing I think we make a mistake there is always going up. In fact, someone wrote an article about it, and so I made a concerted effort to say, well, how far up do I need to be, and then stop and try to go and enjoy other aspects of life.
And grow
It's
a tomato
weird
plant or
because-
something like that.
That's what I'm
It's
doing.
weird because we spent
Yeah.
most of our history outside, right, as humans, and we've been inside for a very short period of time, and now we kind of refer to that as to getting away to the great outdoors, because we're just stuck inside these boxes all the time. But I have one last question, Jimmy, and if you don't mind, and then we can call it. I just want to know, because Marty mentioned that he can now express himself in digital art, and I actually went to Midjourney is the only one I've ever used. You mentioned another one, but I don't remember it right now, Marty.
Stable diffusion is another technology.
Stable diffusion. Okay.
Mhm.
So I went to Midjourney and used it. I learned how to use it in a very rudimentary sense for something that I needed, right? And actually AI created mine and Jimmy's Substack logo, which is very simple. I just went to AI and said, draw this in a line drawing in black and white. And then I found Midjourney and I started doing more complex stuff, and I needed an image for a specific reason. I just started asking for these different images. I have some saved on my computer for I have no idea what reason. I just liked them. Yeah. So both of you, just as quickly as you can, because we're kind of running out of time, who owns that in your mind? Do I own it? Or I did listen to the example of the guy who wrote the comic book, right? If for any of you guys watching this, go to the Fourth Age and listen to, I think it's episode 2 or 3 about the Regulation 1. Listen to the story about the guy who created an AI comic book so that you don't have to recap it here. You should go to their podcast and listen to it. But who owns the art? Just the art.
If it gets more complicated, at some point, I'm going to say it crosses the threshold of basically simulating a human brain. And at that point, how is it any different from folks like Bill Watterson, who has his influences creating new art? I'd have to say at that point, it's just another creature creating art, and therefore it owns it, and whoever asked it to create it for them perhaps owns it. Short of that, I mean, at some point, if it's too simplistic and all it's doing is taking Mickey Mouse and putting a bow on its head and saying it's a whole different character, then I'd say it's still owned by Disney. So at some point we're going to hit some threshold, and what that threshold is, I don't know, but I think it should be studied.
Noah, what do you think? Before you answer, I'll tell you guys about one specific image when we stop recording because it's way too embarrassing. I'm a fucking child. But Noah, what do you think?
In my heart, I think that the AI is abstracting a large amount of our cultural artistic heritage. I think that the art belongs to history of the canon, basically, of art. I think that image belongs to whoever the thousands or even millions of artists that Midjourney used to train the thing up.
Jimmy, any idea? Who do you think it belongs to?
No, I thought Noah's answer was really cool. I thought it was funny that you bashed Walt Disney for putting a bow on Mickey and calling it a new character. I love Calvin and Hobbes.
I really hate that guys like you two are cool now and we're not anymore. I really hate that.
Everything that was nerdy in the 80s is now cool. Dungeons and Dragons, X-Men.
I hate it so much.
Can you imagine?
I was a huge comic book guy, huge
Yeah.
boxes of them when I was a kid. So
Did you walk around with a calculator in your pocket? Because you do now.
nope.
Yeah.
Shut up, Marty. Shut up, Aaron
Thank you.
Rodgers. I don't even want to talk to you guys anymore.
And Marty played football too. Like, okay,
Not
anyway,
really.
thank you guys very much. This has been eye-opening, terrifying. It's been a long ride. I appreciate that very much. Thank you, Noah. Thank you, Marty.
Thank you so
One
much.
more time, tell them, Marty, tell them where they can find you.
Yeah, go ahead. I want to thank Tony Nash real quick because he was our first AI podcast and kind of encourage us to do more of these. So where can
awesome.
they find you guys?
I think we're still trying to figure this out, but right now, if you search for Fourth Age, we're on Substack and on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.